Ian, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, Tom? Thank you for having me. Let's go, everybody. Shout out to all the mind mates out there. I would maybe like to mate with you, but instead, me and Tom are mating with each other today.
We are 100% meeting with each other, 100%. And as well, to all the listeners and followers of your content, you are, my friend, inspiring a literary renaissance.
I'm hoping. I mean, we're going like every day. I mean, I feel like we're straying further and further from God's light in the book world, but I'm like trying to gain it back. And I don't know if I'm Satan or like who in terms of like where I'm trying to take it. But yes, we are creating a literary renaissance, not over on Right Conscious, but also here on MindMate by making you guys think consciously. And obviously one of the best ways to do that and the fastest ways, to do that is through the literary arts, reading, nonfiction, whatever. I mean, it's listening to podcasts like this is great, but you could read, if you read the transcript of this podcast, you could probably finish it in 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's so true. Well, man, like I came across your content because I started reading Infinite Jest, and I was like, what the fuck is this thing? This is like the first chapter when Hal has like that mental breakdown. And it's a beautiful breakdown, like it's so philosophical and it's so dense. And I'm reading this chapter, I'm thinking, I'm going to need some help here. So I started looking up, book summaries from Infinite Jest. And lo and behold, I come across your content and it's just filled with like the best. Like, I think what I love about you so much, man, is you're extremely relatable, but very, very wise. And I know that because you have an ability to condense and synthesize very difficult prose and literary fiction essentially, so that people like, idiots like me can understand that. So thank you firstly for your content.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the only reason I decided to do that and get into this whole game of like finding the hard books and making them more accessible is that I struggled. I remember being back 18 years old and not just getting into reading and that stuff, and I couldn't find anything. Like there were random Reddit posts and you'd have to ask. And sometimes I get driven off Reddit, like, and people have theories. So I was like, okay, I need something for free that people can come and access. And it's crazy that we don't have that. Like all across, I think just so many things are gatekept by the academics and professors. And it's insane that there are people who have written books on Infinite Jest. There's many, and there's thousands, I would say maybe hundreds of journal articles, probably thousands on David Foster Wallace. And almost none of them have decided to turn on a microphone and say something and put it out for free. And they're all paywall. They're like, and if you're listening right now, where do you go and find all these secondary sources? Maybe some of you, if you went to college, but for most people, it's out of your head. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think I remember watching a video of yours recently where, if you want to get a publishing deal, because so many of us who love to write love this idea of getting a publishing deal, right? Because I think it's glorified, and I think the culture surrounding writing hasn't quite caught up to what's actually going on in the culture with self-publishing and the middleman of this knowledge and academia model just broken down. Like even people who have book publishing deals from university press organizations and things like that, it's so much money to pay for that book. So there's a whole bunch of us that are on the other side that want to find the good content, the resourceful content on the internet, but don't want to have to deal with that paywall.
Yeah, no. And shout out to you for releasing Yes, I'm Fine, Just Tired. I mean, it seems like you've had some success with that. And everyone, if you guys want to obviously go support Tom, go buy his book. I'm plugging for him right now.
I'm paying Ian for doing this.
yeah, thank you. Make sure you get that Venmo link that I sent you. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, that's the problem, that so many people, it's so hard not to, even if you get the deal with, Penguin or whoever, 98% of books sell less than 5,000 copies that are published by a major house, which means that you'll make less than $10,000 for that book. And so it's a really bad deal all around. And then you don't have the, I assume you self-published your book?
Yeah.
And so you own the rights of that. So not only are you giving away, you're only making $5,000 at most for something you put thousands of hours into, you're also losing the rights forever. And it's, we're in a really sticky situation. And, speaking of David Foster Wallace, and just to bring this up to the people, it's really about, and this is everything. I mean, this is what Tom's doing right now. This is what I'm doing. It sucks. Like all of us want to be a hermit. We want to be a recluse. We want to just, not do anything and be able to release the MindMate podcast and get millions of listeners. But there is the unfortunate promotional aspect to things. And I'd ask you, Tom, what negative effects have you seen of people having to get online and promote, and even like I have friends who work at car dealerships and they're forced to use TikTok and Instagram now. Like,
Right.
have you noticed anything with that?
Yeah. Well, I suppose like specifically in the writing world, the love of the art just taking care of itself, right? Even I know we're doing on writing in the book club that you got going at the moment. Beautiful book by Stephen King, right? And I remember very well that this part in the book where he's talking about, most writers have this idea, this glorified idea of escaping to a cabin in the woods with like a butler, at your beck and call, and you can just write and all that sort of stuff. But his point on that, I think, is really good. He said he was supporting a family. He was an English teacher, I think, at the time before Carrie came out. And he actually said that having that fire underneath him, because he had all these responsibilities, actually fueled the pressure in a good way to make him write more, because he didn't have that time. So I think we can use that and look at marketing through a similar lens, where it's like you've got the opportunity now to get your stuff out there and go bananas with it. And I might add as well that you don't have to necessarily have a TikTok account or an Instagram account. Find the way that broadcasting ideas works for you, and then just go bananas on that. I love speaking with people. I really, really love people, love connecting with you, man, as an example. So podcasting does the job for me, and YouTube does the job for you as well as podcasting. But someone might just kill it on some Pinterest account, that then has like a nice little link to their writing, whatever it is. So it's, I suppose, because there's no one way to do it, that's almost existentially destabilizing for a lot of people, but it's also liberating.
Oh, 100%. I mean, and that's great advice. That's the advice I would give. Like, the only things like, I don't even know how to like promote or use Instagram. Like, I'll just, so I just troll. Like I put a photo the other day of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. I put the Prophet. I don't know what to do. It's just not my platform. But YouTube, I like it. I like that I can just put long form content out there, and with podcasting for you. And so, yeah, I mean, I would say that there's at least something that you're comfortable with, even if it's just writing, even if it's just the classic blog. Like, a lot of that's still underrated. And so there are ways to get your ideas, get your thoughts, and it's therapeutic. Like, there are people out there who need to hear your story, need to hear your point of views. You're probably an expert in something that, not to say like, oh, you need to make, a video on how to, plumbing or something, but there are sort of niche things that you can, talk about. And like, yeah, I mean, exemplified really by what I've listened to some of your podcasts, and you have all types of people. Like, I can't, it's crazy, it's like such a broad, like, all those people though showed up, all of them came online and, wanted to share a vision. So.
Right. Exactly. I think I think that's one of the coolest things about it, is if you have an interest in anything, you can start a show on that. But even if you don't have an interest in anything, you can use the show to find out what your interests are, and then have it morph and grow in that way. Ian, I wanted to ask you, man. So you have a crazy depth of knowledge about not only literary fiction, but how to write in general. What have some of the most important books been for you, and why were they so important for you at certain points in your life?
Like how, like just in fiction, or how to be a writer, like just.
Yeah, both. I mean, I suppose I'm more interested in actually, we'll start with fiction or nonfiction, but what were some of the books that have been most important to you? What were they doing for you when you read them? Maybe they were therapeutic in some way, or yeah.
Yeah. So I had, in a lot of reading, like, is community based, even though that, like, I pick up, like, I would never have read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings if I didn't have someone like really push it on me. And even though we live in kind of these isolated valleys, a lot of the biggest breakthroughs I've ever had have actually come from other people. And so in 8th grade, I had this crazy teacher named Christopher Stewart, Mr. Stewart, and he was from Tennessee and had this deep Southern accent. And he'd show up to school like, he'd be partying all night, and he'd wear black suits. And he had this thing called the Boys Book Club, which I don't know if that would even be allowed anymore, and biological boys only. And we would show up, and this guy would show us, we would sit and he'd give us books. So he would, so every single week someone would have to give a presentation on something that the CIA did like wrong, like some botched project. And then he would give us these books, and then we would watch R-rated movies. It was like, it was very, very illegal. No one was watching, anyway. He was always like looking out the window. And now I'm looking back, it's like, oh man, we were doing, as a current high school teacher, like if I did that, I'd make the newspaper, I'd make the local city's Facebook group. Like, can't do that anymore. But anyway, the book, he gave me a lot of different books, but the book that turned me really on, and I recommend to a lot of people on their kind of early journey as in reading, is Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Have you ever read that one?
No.
Yeah, so Hermann Hesse was kind of an early 20th century author. He was a modernist, and Siddhartha is kind of a fictional account of the Buddha's life. And and it's really good. And Hesse is a great literary fiction author. It's not like too weird or anything. But in 8th grade, that turned me on to the East and the Eastern philosophy, because a lot of people have preconceived notions about the East in general. And maybe you've learned about it before, but, as a beginner getting into thinking and knowledge, that was big to me, because a lot of us have been programmed with kind of this Western competitive, individualistic Christian mindset. And even if you want to stay in that, understanding the dyadic element, which is the East, because China and India, we're growing almost at the same pace as us at the same time. In very similar ways, because when you look at like super pagan cultures like North America and parts of Africa, or even Australia and Southeast Asia, they were very much more isolated, but there was still a slight connection between Asia and the West. And, seemingly we grew at the same time. So yeah, right. That one really blew my mind. And that set me down like an Eastern philosophy rabbit hole that I'm still on. Another one that blew my mind and really helped me understand how to use psychedelics and open up my brain to like deeper levels of psychology. There's a guy out there, I don't know if I even recommend this book anymore. It's called Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson. And he was friends with Tim Leary and that whole crew. And it just like, he talked about how our brain's a software, and that can really open us up. And so a lot of you guys who are listening to this podcast already know all this. You have been exposed to Eastern philosophy and that stuff. But early in life, those were kind of the big pivotal books. But then at 18, speaking of like these books that you were given, Infinite Jest, I was at a store with my dad, and my dad and he talked about books with me sometimes, but I didn't really understand until later in life that he was this huge reader. He says, oh, you got to read this book. And he gives me Infinite Jest. And apparently he read it back in the 90s. And I was actually going to mention that earlier about how writers, and you have to put yourself out there and, this is Ian Cattanach, this is Tom, that David Foster Wallace, in promoting Infinite Jest, the publishing house came out and they were sending out letters. That's like an underrated method. Like I've never sent a letter before, but you open up, it says, can you complete this book? Or are you smart enough to read Infinite Jest? And they send out hundreds of thousands of these things. And so speaking of the Western competitive mindset, we, people tapped into that and they're like, oh my God, can I do that? Can I read this? And, that really showed me the limit. So, because I was reading classic authors in these books, even Cormac McCarthy. But when I saw what someone who is kind of, kind of a little bit wonky and ADHD and really smart can do with the novel, I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. This is how it feels to live in the 21st century. So with fiction,
yeah, that's awesome.
I guess Prometheus Rising wasn't fiction, but yeah, those really sent me on my way and into right. Further inquiry.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you spoke about the unenlightened one's journey. Siddhartha Gautama. I think that's such a common. The more I reach out to like-minded people and get to know them like yourself, the more I feel that we're very binded by that experience of growing up in the West, where it's absolutely dominated by scientific empiricism of understanding like what makes the world, how the world works. But the East is so good at helping us understand how to live in the world, how to play the act of being a human being in the phenomenological experience. I think, the Buddha story is amazing about, finding that middle way between asceticism and self-indulgence. I took a lot from, learning about the East and stuff like that as well. But we'd be remiss not to talk about DFW. We have to talk about David Foster Wallace on this show. What do you think was like? I don't know about you, man, but I tend to really, and I probably shouldn't, but I sort of can't help it. I tend to glorify the tormented artist, because I just think that there's something so profound about like a really disturbed individual who puts out this like amazing piece of art, whatever it is. Like, Vincent van Gogh was in a psychiatric institute, but he just changed the world. Even Herman Melville, Moby Dick, right? But I think the downside to it is a lot of them weren't recognized whilst they were alive. David Foster Wallace obviously was, but Vincent van Gogh wasn't, Herman Melville wasn't. Why do you think we glorify the tormented artist? Like, what do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I think an easy analogy to think about it through is like with athletics. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen David Goggins online before. We love him. He's out there and he's punishing himself. He's telling us to push it, to go to the limits. And, but what gives him credit though is that he was a Navy SEAL. He, in a year and a half of ultra racing, finished Badwater and took third place or something. So there's a lot of people that we look up to kind of athletically, and the physical is just an easy way to like see examples. And so we love the underdog. We love the person who pushes himself for no reason. And I think that's what this tormented artist is to a lot of people, that we use it as like, when I listen to David Goggins when I'm doing kettlebells or something, to give me motivation to pull me up. And I'm never going to do an ultra race or go as hard as he does. But I think that I feel a similar, thing when I see these tortured artists, that it's just a means of like putting myself in a trance so that I can at least get close to what they are doing, because yeah, a lot of us want to be that. It's, it's unfortunate that we can't just live our own lives and stay there. But, sometimes when I'm visualizing or reading, I'm like, I can do this. Like, I want to do this one day, like, whatever medium we're in, like, I want to feel like what it feels like to be in a concert playing music in front of a bunch of people. And sometimes, we visualize ourselves up there. And, so I think that the tormented artist, but, it could go back to something else. Have you ever heard of Otto Rank?
Yeah. Amazing psychoanalyst.
Yeah, and he has this book, Art and the Artist, Creative Personality, or the Creative Urge and Personality Development. And Rank was the protege of Sigmund Freud and was Freud's secretary, and was kind of seen as the one, not Jung, not Alder, not Wilhelm Reich or the others. It was him. And he, like the other three, broke away from Freud. But he broke away for the mythological. He saw all throughout history this idea of the tortured artist, of this person with trauma, and that the artist is inspired to create from their trauma. Ernest Becker and the Denial of Death picked up on Otto Rank and all that. But, I think there's a lot of that too, that he also wrote a book. He was also very innovative in the sense that he wrote a book called The Trauma of Birth. And now when you look at the amount of cesarean sections and mothers not breastfeeding and, negligence. That's always been a history. Honestly, mothers have died during childbirth, children have died. And so I think the trauma of birth, like, even if, your mom didn't hit you or, nothing crazy happened, I think there's also that, that easy or that unconscious, stuff with birth and the trauma there. So that's what his theory, that's his theory. And so, yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that, right? Like, and I think we really amplify that idea on social media in this day and age, this idea that your purpose can be born from your deepest pain, and that art is a way to find some sort of control over something that happened to you that made you feel out of control, or uncontrollable. I think, that reminds me of that Nietzsche quote, "We have art lest we perish from truth." This idea that if I can create something to make sense of my world, it gives me a sort of way to, I don't know, bolster my ego in a healthy way, or make me feel like I'm not falling to the existential abyss so quickly, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no. And that brings up an interesting point, though. We're talking about writing, we're talking about art. And what a lot of people do early on in their art career, though, is write about their trauma, write about that. And if you want to do a nonfiction memoir, I understand. But, if you just want to get into art, if you want to do this, one of the last things that you should be looking at as a beginner or even as an intermediate is your own trauma, your own problems, because it is really close to you. And the number one thing to develop, first of all, is a connection, obviously, with the deeper self, but more importantly, with objects, with things. All artists need to be able to draw things and understand and see correctly before they can do these expansive abstract type pieces. That's the first thing you do in art school is you go and look at objects. But for writers, it's the same thing. This is why I tell my students and people all the time. If you can't write about, something in your house or something outside in your window beautifully, why the hell would I want to read your 100,000 page novel? Right. And this actually goes back to seeing, if you look at the Buddha in Eastern philosophy, this is where all this comes from. And this was developed in writing by T.S. Eliot, William Carlos Williams, Ezra Pound, Rilke, and the modernists, because they were the first people to get translations of Eastern poetry and Eastern philosophy in the early 20th century. And so they were the intellectuals at the time, and they started consuming this. And they were like, oh my God, it's about objects. It's about seeing. It's about having the most accurate perception of reality possible. And so whether it's in art or in your personal life and on your journey, I mean, that's what I think everyone should be trying to achieve at the start, because if you don't do that, then you're wandering in the abyss. I mean, speaking of yoga and the chakras, there is, the 8 limbs of yoga, are supposed to be gone through in order. And the 6th limb, is called dharana, and that's called it's called yogic meditation, where you're supposed to visualize chakras or objects, and you can move on to the 7th step, which is mindful meditation, which is what everyone does. Just focus on the breath, focus on this. That the yogis, who are the most in my opinion enlightened individuals per capita in history, got the best system. They said that if you don't learn how to see first and you just move into random meditation, then you're just going to become more of what you are. You have to be able to see reality and see yourself before you can move on into the ether. So
that's interesting. Is that I knew this would happen. So if people can't keep up, I apologize, but I knew that we would just be jumping from topic to topic.
I talk fast. I'm sorry.
No, it's awesome. It's awesome. I wonder if that's kind of like when Ram Dass went to India. He thought that he was doing all these mushrooms to get high all the time, but then he sort of later developed this understanding that the East in general had this pathway to enlightenment, and you can't just keep trying to get high all the time without actually doing the processes and the steps in order to be able to live in that place.
Yeah, and and when Ram Dass went to India and studied under his guru Maharishi, he had this. So back in the day, I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm sure today, I don't know, this actually changed recently, but a lot of you guys, if you're older, took acid for the first time with a tab of acid, right? You took the tab of acid. But back in the day, they only had liquid vials of acid, or like this weird thing where you put your hand on and licked it, and they were taking like 10 to 50 hits of acid at once in comparison. They were going crazy with it. And so when Ram Dass went to India the first time, still as Richard Alpert, he had this vial of acid. And then Maharishi had heard that this guy, Richard Alpert, was involved with Tim Leary. And he said, give me your power. And he's like, what? He said, give me your power. Show me this thing. So he takes the bottle and he chugs all of it. and Ram Dass is like, oh my God, he took hundreds of hits of acid. But what happened is that he was like, this won't affect me. And he went about the rest of his day and did everything perfectly. And he said, oh, it affected me for a moment, but all drugs do. I mean, and don't take this advice, not all drugs. Obviously, if you take it, shoot some heroin in. Right. This isn't Dune. You're not the Benny Gesserits. You can't just manipulate the poison out of your body. But with a psychedelic substance that isn't going to kill you or is having more of a psychological effect, you can control your own brain chemistry. We do it all the time. And if you are one of these yogi masters, you can, as we've seen, like people like Wim Hof or other people, you can increase your own temperature through breathing exercises while in a freezing cold lake. You can, change aspects of your physiology and your psychology through, meditation, breathing exercises, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, that's just a crazy point that he was able to stay focused, because what does acid do? It sends you on this trip, a trip of images and feelings and these things. But if you can maintain one state of focus, then that's not an issue.
Right. Yeah, that was so interesting. I remember reading that. I think that was in Be Here Now from memory, but yeah. I remember reading that and be like, what the hell? This dude's just down like a bathtub of acid, and he's like, yeah, it's like totally sweet. Just went about his day, right? And yeah, I think that's when Ram Dass was like, yeah, Richard Alpert's kind of like, okay, there's probably something to this shit here that I need to figure out.
I remember reading that when I took a little too much one time, and I'm done. I'm in the middle of the desert. It's like 105 degrees, and I'm like, I need help, but there's no one to call. I felt like a howling condenser at the start of Infinite Jest. I'm sitting there like, I'm going to die out here. And I was like, be like Maharishi. And I was like, oh shit, I have no training. I'm weak. This was, hope for the best. But I'm alive, so I made it. But
that's it. Yeah. That's it. No life jacket, right? Crazy, man. Well, so one of the things I also want to talk to you about, Ian, is what you see going on in culture today, but perhaps from like a philosophical perspective, not necessarily a political perspective, right? I think, David Foster Wallace and different states of consciousness is a really nice segue into that. You spoke about modernism before, this still, I suppose, this idea or this belief in a meta narrative, or an objective truth, and then postmodernism coming into that and sort of deconstructing a lot of these meta narratives, which I think, to your point, I can't remember if we've discussed this before, or perhaps I think I might have heard you speaking about it. Postmodernism cops a lot of shit in this day and age for the Jordan Petersons of the world. I really love Jordan Peterson, but he's constantly throwing in, postmodernism has done this and this to the world. And there's obviously lots of different factions of postmodernism, like, the third wave of postmodernism, where everything can be understood in terms of power and privilege. And, if we deconstruct something enough, we'll eventually find the power privileged thing that's going on there. But what do you think it's giving rise to now? Like, I wonder what your perspective is on like this new metamodernism that's perhaps sort of like trying to synthesize the two there. Are you optimistic about the world now, or are you pessimistic? Like, what's going on with you there?
Yeah, and you asked the philosophical perspective. So speaking of Heidegger, so once again in the early 20th century, Martin Heidegger, who was a German philosopher, later Nazi, but who wrote a very famous book, Being in Time, I highly recommend. He took a lot of his philosophy from the East. And so Jacques Derrida, speaking of postmodernism, well, speaking of Eastern philosophy, said they have no philosophy. And he was being facetious. Well, he wasn't really. He was being serious in the sense that since that Aristotle and the I don't even remember their name right now. I'm a little tired, but the pre-Socratic, what's up? The pre-Socratic philosophers, in the West, philosophy has been this big deal, and it's been building upon each other and remixing each other. When you look at, I think, at the 13th century with Thomas Aquinas, Christianity got taken to the next level because Aquinas refound Plato and Aristotle and integrated Aristotelian logic and systems into Christianity. And so, a lot of it's been building and building. And, it kind of started going at a hyper level after Francis Bacon and Kant and all these people. And so it's like this complex web. And so what Martin Heidegger did was be very well versed as a professor and thinker in all those aspects of Western philosophy. But then he got exposed to the East and really integrated a lot of the ideas of subjectivity and whatnot from Eastern philosophy into the West. And what that did was kick off the postmodernist era, not yet exactly, but it inspired, and Heidegger was the main inspiration for Deleuze, Derrida, Foucault, all those different people. And so postmodernism, a lot of the time gets this bad rap because anything that's applied to large groups of people, any absolute system, usually is going to be bad. I used to live in Utah. And if you guys don't know, Utah in the United States is run by Mormons. It's like over 50% Mormon. It's a religion. And the same in like Alabama with the Baptists and stuff. And when any religion or any group is like controlling a narrative and they're very hard nosed about it, I mean, it can create a lot of problems.
Right.
And when you start forcing, it on people's lives, like I went to college in Utah, and I know guys that went to, if you got caught with weed, you were going to jail for at least a week. If you got caught with like a harder drug like psychedelic, you could be in there for months. That's, it's one of the few states where like in the US where that would happen. And so, the religion started to influence the population. And so postmodernism really since the 1990s has been obviously politicized and used to, maybe not the greatest effects, but you spoke about metamodernism and the meta narrative. And what kind of happened is, I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen The Matrix, but The Matrix was inspired by Jean Baudrillard, a French sociologist who wrote a book, Simulacra and Simulation, and many other books that honestly I think inspired it more. But his main theory of many is this idea of the simulacra. And the simulacra is a copy of a copy. Right now, you are not, well, I'm watching, a simulacra of Tom right now. Even though he's somewhat live, we're not live in person right now. And you guys are now a step down the chain. But then your interpretation is another copy of a copy. You're seeing me, but then when you interpret what I'm saying, so some of these things go on forever, because what if I say, what if you were inspired to go take 5 hits of acid out in the desert? Well, you were just inspired by a simulacra of a simulacra of a simulacra. And so it could become, and so when you look at digital information in the digital world, we don't even know where a lot of this stuff, where did a Zoom come from? Where did these websites, where did all of this start? It started in some dude's head. That's the start of the simulacra. or out in nature, probably more likely. And so we're in this weird state where we've moved into, so where that's a problem. And that's always kind of been a problem. That's the main problem of religion. You go to a Catholic church and you see Jesus hung up on the cross, but you're experiencing a simulacra of the situation. And so your job is to try to connect back to the source. But we're so far out now because of technology, but then because of the amount of information out on the internet is at least doubling, if not getting more every single day. It's, it would take millions of lifetimes to be able to consume it all. And so we're basically just the infrastructure of the platforms we use and how we go about in the world is meta narrative, and super fractured. And I think that's really, really bad for people because that's the end game. You're supposed to get trippy at the end. You're supposed to start going down the portals after you've done shamanic training. Speaking of shamanic training, if you look, I'm out here in the Sonoran Desert. Have you ever read Carlos Castaneda?
No, I don't think I have, but I know Carlos Castaneda. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So Carlos Castaneda, anyway, so a lot of shamanic traditions at the start, they obviously do psychedelic drugs, ayahuasca, peyote, whatever. But one of the main first exercises that you have to accomplish, and there's a great book called by a spiritual ecologist who's still alive. He's probably one of my favorite authors. I have a 4.5 hour breakdown of this book on my YouTube channel. Oh, it's called Becoming Animal by David Abram. But he talks about how he trained in Southeast Asia, I think in Bali in the 1970s, in a shamanic tradition. And his first task was going and looking at a raven, going kind of sitting near ravens and looking at them for months on end. And he eventually learned to embody the energy of the raven and become the raven, maybe not in physical reality, but in astral projection, to really feel that energy. I mean, and they would say that there's a physical transformation also. I don't know if we need to go there, but, and so they had that down. They had the singular vision, initiation rites, in pagan cultures are to help you stabilize when shit gets crazy. And so, but instead we are red pilled. We are thrown into meta narrative, meta modernism immediately, and then told to find purpose in life. And then we have to go back to Jordan Peterson or whoever later on when it's, so it's kind of flipped, and I don't think it has worked very well.
Yeah. And, lo and behold, like the crisis of meaning, right? Where everyone's sort of nihilistic, and you see how nihilism, like you could almost argue that the first wave of postmodernism is a disillusioned, movement. It's like directly after World War II, right? Built off existentialism, this idea that existence precedes essence. So there's no sort of, essential feature as to who I am. So the whole world's just this giant playground, and I've got no blueprint as to how to navigate. I don't know what the rules of the game of life are. And when you have this deconstructivist ideology, which I think is really good, especially in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right, where, like what you said, meta narratives were very dominating, and there were a lot, like, this was sort of second wave feminism at the time, where there were very real issues for women, and so many other ways in which meta narratives were oppressing, essentially. But now you're in this day and age, and because there's no path or understanding of how to be a human being or ideal, everyone's just sort of wandering aimlessly in a way. And this is why I think people like Jordan Peterson have become so popular. But people, even as far red pill as Andrew Tate, right, where it's like people are just clinging to anyone to say, tell me how to live. And because you can actually choose who is going to be your idol, because the internet's just free for everyone, to your point, man, like it brings up some pretty serious issues.
Yeah, and I've noticed that as a public school teacher. Like, I remember the day that TikTok came out. It was Musical.ly for a while, and I saw kids doing Musical.ly and singing over lyrics. But I remember like kids dancing in my class and things starting to take this weird turn. And then the amount of kids having mental illness and becoming talks. Like, kids are literally talks now. And that's something that Jordan Peterson has said before, is that when you destroy the hierarchy, a new hidden one assembles. So, there's been this destruction of all these different things. And so everyone is different now, but every single year, the same group of kids, it's almost like a simulation, the same group of kids with the same group of problems, with very few outliers or difference, comes into my class, into my life. And they think they're free. They think that because they are, doing these extreme displays of and what it also does is that there are people who are also becoming closed-minded, because there's this another group of kids who didn't take the bait. You know, the kids like in school that are a little bit more, who've always been more conservative, or like they're like, what the hell are these people doing? So they're like becoming more closed-minded. And so it's like this really weird, odd thing where one group thinks they're becoming more open-minded, but they're really just following following the desires of others. Do you know about Rene Girard? Just
Yes. Why do I know Rene? Tell me about it.
Yeah, Rene Girard, I don't even know what he is technically. I mean, he must be a sociologist, philosopher.
Yeah.
He's been making a big comeback. Yeah, French historian and social critic. Yeah,
Right.
He's been making a big comeback kind of recently because he has this theory called mimetic desire, mimetic violence, and he talks about how we don't actually know. Our desires come from other people, come from imitation, that none of us actually have our own true desires.
Yeah.
And that could aid to our point of Eastern, philosophy and shamanism, and that's what you're doing, trying to actually find authentic desires. But what eventually happens, kind of like Cain and Abel in the Bible, is that there are these mimetic rivals. Like, I don't know, I'm sure everyone out there, maybe not everyone, but if you've ever had a sibling before and they're copycatting you, or a younger cousin or someone, you hate it. You're like, it's the most annoying thing. Like, why does this piss me off so bad? But when you look at all throughout history and in the Bible, that rivalry leads to scapegoating, leads to further problems. That shared desires don't work out very well. So eventually, he postulates that we had to create government to stop this. But as a government, we also have to have a mimetic rivalry. So that's why we say, Russia, China, Mexico, whoever, because they're this kind of scapegoat. Everybody has to be scapegoated, because when a group comes together, someone has to be a scapegoat. So I don't know. That was kind of a side tangent.
So good though. But you're right. Like, this is what's interesting, right? Like, I think a lot of what postmodernism purports is really, really interesting stuff. It's like knowledge. Is there a? I'm just going to say this again. Is there a? Sorry, guys, just some technical difficulties. Please forgive. Is knowledge discovered or created, right? Is there such a thing as objective knowledge, or is knowledge this sort of... I wrote this thing down because I wanted to tell you about it before we come into it. So it's like the idea that... So social constructivism implies that what is understood is not an objective fact. Rather, what is understood evolves through interpersonal interaction and agreement as to what is fact, right? So a desire, like I have this idea to, or this desire to write a book. It's like, well, is that my desire, or is that a desire that I want because I've seen someone else be externally validated by doing that thing, and that's why I want it?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, you speak to a lot of, social constructivism, like learning, through, that's crazy. You wrote that down. Yeah.
Oh, that wasn't my writing, man. I was doing some, that's Ginter et al. 1996, but I knew we'd get into some of this philosophical stuff, so I thought it was be good to highlight.
Yeah. And not to, well, what do you think? I mean, do you take the social constructivist view?
Oh man, I'm going to be really annoying and diplomatic here, and I'm going to say both. I think that
okay.
I think knowledge is both discovered and created. I'm not like a full blown postmodernist, but I'm also not like, for example, a biological essentialist. And this is where I see online, speaking politically, where you've got people on the far left who are totally social constructivist, and then people on the far right who are totally evolutionary biological essentialists, right? And you see guys on there who are doing, the red pill manosphere stuff, who are saying that the reason why men are like this is because this is what was like 210 million years ago, and all that sort of stuff, which is one part of it. Like, it's what Robert Sapolsky says. It's like, it's evolution in terms of a framework to understand human behavior is one bucket of many buckets, right? But it is also the case that human beings socially construct knowledge, and that's what creates meta narratives, and then leads to sort of power dynamics and things like. I think that was Foucault that spoke about biopower and power knowledge and all this sort of stuff. People often give me some shit because they say I'm just always like in the middle and I don't necessarily take a side. Sometimes I really try to play devil's advocate on myself and think about, well, hang on, should I actually be more left here or more right here, or should I be more of a constructivist or an essentialist? I can't figure it out. I think they're both right. Like, I believe in categories, and I also believe in blurring the lines of those categories. So I'm an annoying diplomat. Sorry, guys.
No, and let's purple pill you into interference, man. I mean, so these are the two things we have, objective versus subjective, essentialism versus constructivism, evolution versus creationism. But there is a third option, everyone. And it has to do, not to go too crazy here, but it has to do with forms of interference. And I don't know what it could be. We could go as far as alien interference or as simple as just psychological unconscious interference that basically renders us illogical, make us that we can't actually understand. I think, like, the more I get into it and the more I try to frame reality as an essentialist or a constructivist, they just don't work.
Yeah.
And then having to use both, I'm like, wait, like that. We can pick and grab from theories all we want, but when I look at the trajectory of human nature and how we got here, I feel like there have been things that have like racked our unconscious. Like, speaking of trauma, whether that's meteor showers, cataclysmic events, psychedelics, these types of things that have given us like transgenerational trauma to the utmost degree, and that we're just carrying with us today. That basically we're just out here floating, and so some of these, then that's why it doesn't really make sense. Like, we can apply both because, anyway.
But don't you think we have to apply both? Like, especially, I mean, you're in America right at the moment, obviously. So it's like highly politicized culture. Like the the guy who's probably going to win the presidency nearly died, nearly got shot, nearly got assassinated. It was insane, And then a lot of people are saying, well, Biden, he's done a lot of good, but he's just too old, and we wish that wasn't the case. But age is a real thing, and it's so politicized. And so, like, you can't, to even say that you have a little bit of a nuanced opinion means you're automatically shipped into that category, so that I can understand you, so that I don't have to think critically. It's this is why I suppose I like the people who try to run to the nuance, who like try to run to the center, try to understand the complex nature of ontology, right? What it means to be alive, because it can never truly be grasped. And to say that, your opinion is correct based upon this, this, and this, and this it's just one perspective of many, many perspectives.
Yeah. And what makes you think be an essentialist? Like, you're sitting here looking at our life. Let's talk about it. Let's hear you're like, if you had to be an essentialist, what would you describe the world? Like, why?
So like, I suppose like essentialism being, there are sort of essential features to, for example, being a male or being a female, right? Or there are essential features to how to live a life, right? So that sort of flies in the face of moral relativism, in comparison to universalism, where there are some ways that we just know to be true that make your life better, as opposed to whatever you do is totally fine as long as you do it, right? I think some of the ways that make me an essentialist are just by listening to Andrew Huberman as an example, where you play around with it yourself, so I'm, as an example, like, I'm 95 days off coffee and alcohol at the moment. I feel great. And that tells me that there are some limits to being in a human body, back to that understanding of biology, that I can't play around with it too much. It's not infinitely malleable. And so long as I exist or behave within the confines of those limitations, I'm actually going to live a really healthy life, right? So I just can't get away from biology limiting us to some degree. And that's what makes me, I suppose, an essentialist in that area. But then the other side is also true, where there's so many things that make Tom Ahern a malleable entity. And the Tom Ahern that I was in my early 20s and late teens, the guy who ended up being, the dude in that book, Yes, I'm Fine, Just Tired, my first book, I thought that being enough would mean being an AFL player, right? Which is like NFL equivalent here in Australia. And once I made it to that goal, then that was going to be it. And I'd get all the girls and all the money. And I was like in that real sort of adolescent masculine stage, right? And there's so much more to me now that I love. So that part is like, my psychology is really malleable, but then it's nested inside biological features that aren't malleable. So I think that's
Yeah.
where I find the connection point.
Yeah, you've been, Andrew Huberman really can make you into an essentialist, man. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I could program. My wife makes fun of me sometimes. She's like, it's like sometimes if I'm going too meta about some things, she's like, you've been listening to Andrew Huberman too much. Like, I'm trying to make everything a protocol. Like, how I take, and some now the fridge is a protocol. Like, I love it. Like, I love it. Like, I love to think that that's how I can do it and like, function. But then I'm like, oh shit, like, and then you hear him and he's like got 5 hoes, he's got 5 side hoes, and you're like,
Heard
oh
about
man,
this.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, like he's managing all the ladies, like, so I'm like, damn, he's on the real protocol over there. Like, it's the protocol.
Oh, that's so
um,
good.
but to kind of offer another, feather in my own cap on the
Yeah,
third way, I
yeah.
have a quote. I have some quotes from, one of the big people that I think you maybe came to my channel for also is Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
Shout out to one of the goats of writing, Cormac McCarthy. And in McCarthy's book, Blood Meridian, it features 3 different groups. It features U.S. American or American scalp hunters going into Mexico. It features the Mexican people, specifically the Sonoran Chihuahuan people, and then the Comanches and Apache Native American indigenous tribes. And in it, he shows a beautiful display that we all fucking suck. That we can blame white people all we want, but that, the Mexica down in Mexico City were sacrificing 100,000 people a year. That, Native North Americans were, after the battle was done, cutting everyone's balls off and genitals and torturing people and enslaving people. That obviously we didn't handle things correctly as colonialists. Like I don't even know how to do that. But everyone really sucks. And in this novel, everyone kills everyone rapes everyone. And he really shows one of his main theses is that we are born innately evil, that we are born, and that we can't change that. It doesn't matter what kind of learning you do, but that some people, as he says of the kid, have this affinity for mindless violence, excuse me. But McCarthy writes in Blood Meridian about free will versus destiny, because that's kind of this big theme. Like, are these guys really out there chopping off heads because they want to, or is it their destiny? And he says, the four gypsies crouched at the edge of the firelight among their strange chattels and watched how the ragged flames fled down the wind as if sucked by some maelstrom out there in the void, some vortex that lay opposite to which man's transit and his reckonings alike lay abrogate, as if beyond will or fate, he and his beasts and his trappings move both in card and in substance under consignment to some third and other destiny. And, I think this third destiny is this. I mean, McCarthy views it as more of a Gnostic interference, that we're living on this prison planet, that we're longing. It's really spirituality, because, we could talk about essentialism, and constructivism all we want, but there, the third way is spirituality and feeling some higher connection to some, once again, irrational thing. It could be an interference or a connection, whatever way. And yeah, I mean, he got this idea from Leo Tolstoy, who said, we find a general law of necessity to which every man is subject, like everything existing. Looking at him from within ourselves as what we are conscious of, we feel ourselves free. I don't know why I wrote that down right now, but
That's interesting. Okay, so this third wave, is that a synthesis of the two? So it's like it's almost like a compatibilistic idea where you're a canoe going down a river and you can control the direction of the canoe, but you can't ultimately decide where the river's going to end up. And if you can marry those together, you can transcend it and then go to that third destiny. Is it kind of like that, or am I like fucking way off?
yeah, no, I mean, I would say so, man. And I can't believe anyone, no offense, maybe I'm just like so biased and cocky. I don't know how you disagree with that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I mean, you really got to be at a point if you're like, and like gone too far in one direction. Like, I don't know who's
Right.
getting mad at you, but like, have you lived life? Have you felt yet? Like, there's something you can't compute
Yeah.
there. That's the whole point of the vision quest. That's the whole point of gaining oneness, because then you can see your destiny or the different options. This is what Paul Atreides does in Dune. He sees the wide variety of options and can take the path. And there are plenty of paths as explored. I won't spoil anything. In Dune, like 3 and 4, he chooses not to take a certain path, and so yeah.
Right. Man, I'm the same. I don't know how you can, that feels so right to me that, yeah, look, that I have control over certain things, if I decide to pick this pen up, but and then the free will is an illusion guys would say, well, yeah, well, you were primed to do that because you had this conversation that you wanted to have this conversation with Ian like 2 days ago when you saw that YouTube video, and that means that dot dot dot. Like in the here and now, like in terms of my phenomenological experience, I'm deciding to pick up this pen. But there's also tons of stuff that I have no control over. So I have some control. Like I feel like I'm an ego, like I have an identity that I can cultivate. But it's like Carl Jung's idea of, an ego being like a boat on the sea and the unconscious being the sea, where you can sort of control the direction of the boat if you want, but you can't pretend, obviously, that you're going to be aware of some tidal wave just nails you. Like we've got to balance the two here.
Yeah, 100%. And in the way, what I do, because I understand people may be skeptical, this may be kind of hard to get into, and this may be like my dad was a professor of statistics, and so maybe I view things in this way and have a mind for this, but it's pretty easy. Like an example of this, though, I used to have a friend who was like a super big raw vegan, and like this was like 15 years ago, or like 12 years ago, and he got caught. I used to live in Las Vegas. I grew up there, and so he got these conference tickets like for free to this raw vegan conference, and so we went, and so I'm there, and I'm looking at the people, and they look healthier than the average people on the standard American diet, but I was like, for making such a dietary commitment, they look a little bit frail.
Mm-hmm.
There's something kind of weird. Everyone's like, hey, man, what's up, bro? And so, okay, like flash forward 2 more years, I was really into Brazilian jiu-jitsu and diet, and I went to a paleo diet conference in Las Vegas. Totally different group of people. Everyone had glowing skin. They were all like, a lot of people were jacked and happy, and seemed like no one seemed psychologically weird, maybe a slight bit of closed-mindedness, but like everyone was like, it was a totally different thing. So I was like, okay, like this is the on-ground reality. And when it comes to these two different possibilities, I just kind of want to slap and throw into the pit of despair people who just sit and like make free will arguments and think they're being cute with it and think it actually applies to reality. Like in the philosophical war and dialogue of the last 3,000 years, you can play it over there. But I know people, as I'm sure you've seen in your private practice and like in life, who force everything. They are controlling everything. Yeah. They are like domineering. And you can do that. And I feel like I could tap into that. And it's not some priming effect. Like I can do that. But every time I've done that in the past, it's ended up unsuccessful. And I think if you look at your life, when you're controlling too much, it just shatters. And like, that's actually the root of a lot of great fiction. A lot of great fictions are about these characters trying to hold on to everything and it falls down.
Right.
And so that usually, falls apart. But then we also know people who are too zen with everything. They let, maybe they're getting abused and they just let everything happen to them. And it's also a disaster. And so, I don't really see outside of very extreme circumstances, like, like maybe a yogi, like meditating, they've given up on everything, but they've set their mind to a path, anyway. So like outside of extreme scenarios, the middle path is, you should, if you aren't feeling called to things, if you're not seeing synchronicities and sometimes having irrational callings, then like I would say something's wrong. Like I would say that if you're not acting on your intuition and inspiration, at least some of the time, then you need to, really focus on that. And then if you're also not very good at objectively, sorting through things, then it's also going to be problematic. But that's education. Are we just so dumb now that we can't get that? Education is about learning music and athletics and all the different arts and reading philosophy, but then there's also crying at a novel or something. Like you get all of it. It's both sides.
Right.
Feeling and thinking. Like it's the binary that we don't want to accept. Like
yeah. It's so true. It's so true. And dude, I think that's why, like coming back to, the rise of right conscious and why you've been able to gain so much traction recently is like people are wanting to stay with deeper ideas for longer, and I mean, this is what's so cool about David Foster Wallace, man. I mean, he was onto this, the nature of consumerism, like so early on. And, you were talking about TikTok before. There's that amazing, like couple of pages in the book where he's basically forewarning us about TikTok and Snapchat filters and all that sort of stuff, but what do you attribute the rise of right conscious to? Do you think it's that thing that people are interested in deeper ideas and want to get away from just quick dopaminergic responses? What do you think it is?
Yeah, I wanted to make videos for myself, and a lot of people love to get these. Some of it is the dopamine hit though, because I'll make a video Cormac McCarthy on, this random author. And then for 30 minutes, I'll discuss like a paragraph he wrote in a journal in 1963. I found at the Cormac McCarthy archive. Like, I'll go crazy. But that is fun to me, but it's also educational, also builds this profile. Like a lot of the time we want to build these models and profiles of people. And with a lot of authors, that just hasn't been done yet, and it's really hard and complex because with the movie, it's only so short. But if you look at an author who's written 20 novels, it's 2 million words to dissect, plus their personal life, plus their influences and who they influence. And so I think that, I think people want to go deeper, but I think they also, I think it balances the two, because you also kind of get this hit like, oh shit, like Ian's talking about David Foster Wallace, Cormac McCarthy on transgenderism today. Like that's a big one that has gotten a lot of clicks. Like, that's crazy. This dude who is 93 years old, who is seen as kind of more this conservative dude from the South, detached, reclusive, is writing about transgenders. Like, oh my God, like I want to see what that's about.
Yeah.
I would say it's contrast. Like I'm mixing, kind of these extreme topics with things and authors that people care about. So
that's awesome. That's that nuance, right? And also you bring so much authenticity and relatability to it as well. Like you're not speaking like a really old, like academic pressure. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you bring it to like an audience that's like really desperate for this stuff, but you speak in a way that they understand, which I think is so awesome, man. And it's really exciting, dude. So what's coming up? Tell me what's coming up for Right Conscious. I know you're halfway in the Infinite Jest course. It's going to have to be like 4 million hours of content, right? But what's coming up for you?
100 plus hours for that. We're working on a lot in the Right Conscious book club and stuff, but what I want to shout out for you guys, and I think a big opportunity if you are into reading and writing, I am starting. So just to kind of, I want to help writers. I want to help people. I want to create, as Tom said at the start, a literary renaissance. And that requires 50,000 authors who are skilled in the craft and are willing to kind of put their work out there and share their kind of meta perspective and like skills that they've acquired. And so I am starting a free writing school. It's about to launch, and it's basically just going to explain everything I know about writing, because I have a paid book club and a paid course stuff. So I wanted to start something for free for people to kind of like, get into the whole writing game, because I don't feel necessarily as comfortable too with like being a writing coach or expert. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to share what I want for free. So if you're interested in writing and even meditation, vision quest stuff, like I combine all of that into like an approach to writing. And so that's what I'm working on now. Like that's the big vision over the next couple of months, what I'm trying to bring to the community. So
yeah, so cool, man. And hey, like not to sell yourself short, like you've got some credentials. Like you're an English teacher, you're a very seasoned poet. I've read some of your poetry. It's honestly like bottom of my heart, beautiful stuff. Like I really like it. I've read a lot of it actually on Right Conscious Substack. So it's not just. We're not just speaking to this dude here that loves to write. Like he's got some shit behind him as well. So
thank you, man. I know. I'm trying to be a little bit humble. I can't go full. The controlling Ian. If I go essentialist, I'm the best fucking writer ever. Like all you guys, like I'm the best. Come to my course. Like, so I can't go there. Hold it back.
Oh man, so good. Like I knew we would just get into it straight away, and it did not disappoint. This is obviously going to be the first of many podcasts. I can feel it, man. I can feel us catching up.
Yeah, anytime, any place.
Yeah.
Let's do it, man.
Awesome. So where can people find you very quickly?
Right Conscious on all platforms, and that is right, like writing, and then, conscious. And then also at school.com/Right Conscious. That's where the free writing course is going to launch very soon.
Boom. Ian, such a pleasure, my friend.
All right. Peace out, my man. Thank you. Shout out to all the mind mates out there.
That's it. Guys, speak to you soon. Bye-bye.